Before we start today's episode, let me tell you about my latest adventure. Introducing Lux Coffee Co., a specialty-grade coffee company inspired by creativity and creatives. The debut range is sourced from some of the best farms in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Africa, offering beautiful flavors and notes. Our single origins and house blends are roasted every Monday for next day shipping. Visit luxcoffee.co.uk and use code PODCAST for 15% off your first order. And yes, there's exceptional merch too. Lux Coffee Co. is where art meets exceptional coffee.
A good brand will communicate something, will bring people together, and will also evoke feelings. And then the true test would be, do people want to come back? And it's the same thing. Do people want to see some art evolution from that same artist or collective or whatsoever again? So once I put the two and two together, and to be honest, it didn't click back then. And it's only in the last few years that I started to hone in on that. And I'm like, wow, this is probably why I personally like it so much, because this is how I associate it with.
Hello and welcome to Creativity for Sale podcast, a show to help you start and grow your life-changing creative career and business. My name is Radim Malinic and creativity changed my life. You see, I believe creativity can change your life too. I even wrote a book about it and it inspired this podcast. I've set out to interview the world's most brilliant creatives, designers, writers, musicians, makers and marketeers about their life-changing experiences with creativity. If you ever wanted to know how people go from their humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their success, our conversation should provide you with an intimate look into triumphs, challenges and untold stories behind their creative endeavors. We also discuss the highs and lows of creative careers and creative life. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation and the boundless potential within us all. Let creativity change your life. Are you ready? My guest today is a design entrepreneur with a decade of experience in shaping and defining visual landscapes. A commitment to excellence and a deep understanding of the intersection between art and design has led her to craft unique community-based brand experiences. As a regular host of Adobe Live and a founding member of Ottawa Design Club, she uses these to amplify diverse voices and perspectives within the design community. It is my pleasure to introduce Izzy Poirier. Hey Izzy, it's nice to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you. And thank you for having me.
I'm really excited. It seems to have a bit of a sort of Canadian series at the moment. So we've done Toronto, we've done Hamilton, that's places we're definitely on the map. Montreal, and finally we arrive in Ottawa.
Ottawa, yes.
Ottawa, and a magical place full of government people. So I think it might be hard not to escape some conversations about government, but for those who have never heard of you or might not have never heard of you, could you introduce yourself, please?
For sure. So I'm Izzy Poirier. You might have seen me on Adobe Live. I'm the founder of the Ottawa Design Club. You might have heard of that too. Formerly IP design studio owner, and now just going under Izzy Poirier because that was such a long intro and I figured it was too complicated. So it's just Izzy Poirier, the brand designer.
Izzy Poirier, the brand designer. What sort of work do you do?
I do mostly branding. Right now, it's been very much about building community, the big shift that I'm going through. And through branding, and how do we connect with an audience? How do we retain an audience? Whether it is through visuals or feeling or whole vibes at an event or in a place. And that does touch on multisensory experiences.
So just from your sort of short background, so for those who have, as you explain where you are, where you're from and what you do, obviously your background is that you worked for the government in Ottawa, so the commute may have been quite short. And then you obviously phased into working under the moniker of IP design. You work in branding. Where does the love for branding come from?
It's crazy because I have a BFA, and back then I would love to put exhibitions together. And to me, building a brand is very similar to building an exhibit, because when you're building artworks, you're trying to communicate something and you're trying to evoke feelings and something within the person who's viewing the artwork or interacting with the artwork. And when I graduated, I mean, it was really hard to find a job. And to me, graphic design was just a no brainer in order to channel this creativity into my work. And then I found branding. And once I started researching it, I just figured out that it was very much the same, because a good brand will communicate something, will bring people together, and will also evoke feelings. And then the true test would be, do people want to come back? And it's the same thing. Do people want to see some art evolution from that same artist or collective or whatsoever again? So once I put the two and two together, and to be honest, it didn't click back then. And it's only in the last few years that I started to hone in on that. And I'm like, wow, this is probably why I personally like it so much, because this is how I associate it with.
When you said it only just clicked, how long did it take for it to click?
I'd say a good 5 years, because I don't think that I understood branding until I had my first project. And this first project, out of all places, happened at the government. And when I was working on that specific project, it was called Canada Beyond 150. The same feelings of happiness or creation, or just almost being in trance, if you want, like you're just like nothing exists around you, was happening when I was designing that project. The same feelings that when I would paint for 14 hours without realizing, because I was so focused on the artwork. And then seeing how people would react to it was magical. And this is when I started to associate the both. And when you're building an art series, it's multiple pieces, right? It's not just one piece, whether it's a photography collection or a collection of artworks for paintings, same thing for installations. And the same applies to a brand, right? You have the foundation, you have the main idea, but then it's segmented into different components. Could be social, could be websites. And it was interesting for me to think like that again.
It's interesting. So what you've described, that there's always been quite sort of conceptual and quite intricate thinking about how to put sort of complex pieces together and curate them. Because if I've got accounting right, I think you mentioned the word feeling about 6 times already. And that is a very important part of branding itself. I mean, it's an important part of our life. Because what you said, like, I didn't really understand branding until I had a proper go at it. Like, actually, when you had had a chance to experience it. And I think that kind of goes to many different things in our lives. Like, you want to prod it, poke it, see like what it is. And then if it's really good, you want to go back for that feeling over and over and over again. And I think a successful branding, successful brand, that's what we want to do with you. Like, you want to, when you buy a new pair of trainers and you buy the food from the same food brand or whatever, because you want to replicate that initial spike of dopamine going like, this is my new discovery. And I want it for myself. I want it for everybody else. I wanted to experience it again. So yeah, I'm with you. Feeling is a very important keyword in branding, but sometimes the feeling can be, negative. Sometimes the feeling could be something that we were not trying to sort of to do and to put into equation. So with your BFA, obviously, and your first Canada Beyond 150, what was the branding project about? What was one Beyond 150 for?
So it's complicated. So bear with me, because it is a government project. So we were a department that did a lot of foresight. So foresight is studying the present in order to make good assumptions about the future. And Canada Beyond 150 invited people from other departments to apply to come and learn with our policy analysts that specific way of looking at the present to make better policies. So this full project lasted about a year. And personally, I gave that challenge to myself that I knew that I was going to be working with this brand for over a year before, during, and after. So I needed to have something that I was happy to look at for a very long time, not just the stakeholders who were deciding on all the decisions. And it had to be interesting for young policy analysts because they were asking that they would have 5 or less years of experience. So it needed to be snappy, fun, trendy, but also have structure and still present as a Government of Canada brand, which was really hard to do. These is still, there's a lot of constraint here. And I was the only one working on it because I was the only designer within my comms team.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like more support and information on your creative journey, you can pick up one of my books to help you do just that. My titles cover branding, graphic design, illustration, all the way to career business advice with ideas how to navigate the highs and lows of the creative process. You can pick up signed paperbacks at no extra cost from my store at novemberuniverse.co.uk, and we are shipping worldwide. Use code PODCAST for extra 10% off your order, and you can find the links in the show notes. Any day should be a new book day. Sounds heavy. That sounds super heavy. And I think what you said about being with it for a year, because there's a lot of emotion in creative industry that we want, short, sharp projects, like fun stuff, despite that dopamine, have that feeling, renewed feeling. And then because that goes really quickly, we want a really long project, and we get a really long project. We're like, can't see the back of this now. Like, this is way too much and way too long. And we are creative people. In fact, we are just people. We are not always happy with the things that we always wish for. Which you ask a designer, what do you want? A longer project. Here's a longer project. What do you want? Shorter project, because the long ones are just too long because you don't have any dopamine, like the feeling sometimes of a despair. So what you're describing actually is quite sort of beyond the realm of just a graphic design, because if you got such quite complicated policies of dissection, that's a strategical thinking that you're taking from that role into what you're doing now. That some people got a head start in print methods or software or coding and that kind of stuff. I don't think your thing is quite strategic. So what you were describing about sort of building communities and sensory experiences, that kind of already sort of starts there. So for those who want to backtrack on the story or find out about a story about you and your government, I think there's a few podcasts where you spill the beans, spill the tea about what you've done there. And you ended up with quite a lot of burnout and a lot of friction. So I think we can sort of leave it on a light-hearted note that we can look back and say, you know what, there's some positives. And I tried to pick out some positives of what those could have been, to go where you've set up on your own and did your own stuff, and you've been doing it for a while. And I think the topic for this conversation I want to do is personal branding and spotting opportunities, like how the feeling that you want to create for yourself, how it then sort of projects into the future and how it provides opportunities. So what happened when you set up on your own?
Oh my gosh. So just for everyone to understand, when I left the government, like you mentioned, I left on a very low note because it was almost out of survival. And I knew that I needed to surround myself with like-minded people if I wanted to jump at this 2 feet, like 2 feet first. Is that the right expression? Sometimes the French does not translate properly, but anywho. Okay, great. C'est comme les 2 pieds premiers, je pense. But that would also be maybe like translated from English. I'm not sure. I don't know anymore. This is like when you're so bilingual, you don't know.
I think we would say like, you want to land it on your you want to land on your feet. That's what we would say.
Exactly. And it's just like, taking that first leap. And I was so isolated at the government too. So I needed to build this community from the ground up. I would attend events, but I would always present as someone working from the government, and I was immediately discarded. So I think it came out of a need to surround myself with like minded people, like mini Izzies, essentially. And this is why I wanted to start the Ottawa Design Club. This happened at the same time as launching my freelancing business. So I technically launched two creative endeavors at the same time. And that was maybe stupid. I did not know what I was getting myself into. I'd say that I still don't know how to split my time properly today, if I'm being fully honest. But both endeavors are heavily intertwined in the development of my career, and one could not have come with the other, which is crazy.
I don't think it's crazy. I think it's necessary because what you described, I think you've given yourself a perfect way to distract yourself. There's nothing better than going through trauma and a burnout and actually give yourself less time to think about what was and actually what could be, like where you're actually heading next. Because, yeah, it might seem like too much, but I would say that was a perfect recipe to get yourself out of that situation.
I think so too. And I think it also gave me purpose in order to take the proper lead or just going to talk to the people that I needed to talk to just to put myself out there. Because there's a lot of freelancers too, right? So if you say, hey, I just started this, they're like, okay, it's another one coming from the government trying to go on her own. But by having this design club under my belt, it's just like, oh, she's trying to bring people together. She's trying to make it in a different way. So let's have our eye on her. Let's try working with her and see what she can bring to us.
How do you start a design club? Have you had experiences or anything like it? Like, how do you start a design club?
So the design club actually existed before. It was a concept coming from Montreal. Unfortunately, they no longer exist. But when I attended their events, I just fell in love with their recipe, and I sent a DM 2 days later asking them if I could bring this to Ottawa, and they said yes. So that was also a way to create connection and create community between cities, because Ottawa is known as this boring government city. I felt that by having a concept that was already proven, that could definitely help me to get the start from the ground up and just go fast at it. And it did. That strategy proved to be right. But how does one start it? It's
I mean, I think you just said it. You start with curiosity and a DM because, again, we can backtrack it to the feeling. You went to Montreal Design Club, you had a feeling, you wanted to recreate that feeling, and you wanted to recreate in what you call a boring government city. So again, I think even though I said we should talk about personal branding and opportunities, I think it's the feeling that's the overarching theme today. So you started it, and you mentioned from government you had lots of friction, but how was your idea met the people on the ground in Ottawa?
I was actually worried that I would not find anyone to be in the club. And when I say club, it's not something that is closed off. It's for those who are new to this concept. It's very much open. It's not a membership. It's just speaker events or panels or zines. And it's all about elevating people's voices, creative voices. And at first I thought that I would run out of people to go on stage. But that's because I was doing like everyone else and I was not looking hard enough. Because once you start looking and you dig and you ask the proper questions, the world would open up in front of you. I have met creative directors in Ottawa working for New York agencies, Ottawa creatives having 2 Emmys for motion graphic, animators working for HBO, Hulu, other creatives working for Nike. I can do some name dropping here, but there's a lot of people like working with big names in Ottawa. And what I love about Ottawa that I have not necessarily found in other cities when I travel is that want to just share. They don't gatekeep. And you ask, do you want to be part of my zine? They don't even know me. And they're like, yes. So they're willing to take that risk because they just want the city to be active in the creative community. So when there is nothing or no opportunities, this is where you can create opportunities and come out on top, and maybe even make a ripple effect for other cities, which has happened because now there is a New York Design Club inspired by Ottawa, which is amazing. Massive win for us.
I love what you said. You said, looking hard enough. I wasn't looking hard enough. That is a beautiful thing to say. Like, what you've unearthed with pre-labeled Ottawa as a boring government city, it's just another city. It's just how maybe the majority of the perception of the feeling could be that. But as you said, looking hard enough, looking long enough, you find what you think didn't exist in a way. And I think it's almost like a template or exception that proves the rule for other cities, because the more you talk about, the more you talk to people, the more you find out, like, this is what's happening because you connecting with people's curiosity, with their passion, with their drive, with their aspirations. And I think giving them a collective drive and a purpose and visibility, as well as even within the same community, can seem empowering, because even though with the design industry, we have our horses in the same race, it's a different discipline. There's plenty of races or plenty of track for all of us. When we accept that other people do sometimes something very close to us, like we can overlap around the edges and we can have similarities, but it's in the acceptance of, I'm me, I'm my own personal brand of creativity. And the less I feel threatened by everybody else, the more I can actually experience this and the more I can actually enjoy it. Because I've had lots of conversation on this podcast with people from different authorities, and there's this mindset like, I'm a freelancer and every job is my last. So it never really is your last, is it? Like, it's because what you create in a kind of knowingly or unknowingly, with you creating yourself a network of collaborators, with you creating an infrastructure where you can actually help others and help them to open their voices to a wider audience, even if it's within the same city, because you never know who's around the corner and who you can help. So I believe with what you just said, with Ottawa Design Club, you do speaking events, but also you do publications. And I think if there's one collective sort of golden thread for all of the Canadians I've ever spoken to, is editorial. There's something about Canada and love for editorial that seems to be a running theme. How did you get to print, editorial, zines, interest in print?
I'm remembering it during the pandemic, and I was watching Adobe Max on my tablet on the side as I was working, and someone had mentioned zines, and I didn't know what they were, but I was curious about them. And then at the same time, that's when we were all into lockdown, and I was seeing all this amazing artwork that was talking about the feeling of isolation on social media. And I asked Ariane, who is the co-founder of the club, I'm like, hey, should we have a zine and maybe we can talk about this? Like, maybe we could just try and put all of those artworks that's talking about the pandemic into one place, and that could even become something that is a marker of time or can like document this period in Ottawa or maybe outside people that are looking at the club. And she's like, yeah. And we went at it very blindly without knowing what it required. So I don't think it was meant to be as big as it is now, our publication or even event around it. And I say big. It's not big compared to like your book, but it's big enough for it to become something that Ottawa is excited about. And yeah, I guess like we never really looked back. We used to have 2 editions a year, but now it's only one as we have gone back in person with our speaker events. So we're doing a lot considering everything is volunteer based.
It's even the idea of just like, you know what, let's give it a go. Like, let's try something, because everything you're describing is still very sensory, it's very physical, it's very interpersonal. And the word feeling again comes to play because there is no other feeling than coming across or interacting with a printed article that is beautifully produced, smells great. You can put it in your bag, you can put it in your pocket, you can read it wherever you want. And as humans, that's how we are almost hardwired. Like somehow the invention of a printing press and where we arrive now is incredible. And I think I know that one of your zines that you produced, it's almost like verging on a feel of despair because what you've created for yourself is almost this exploratory playground for multiple Pantone colors, printing methods, spot UV, and we do these things voluntarily. Like we give ourselves a headache because we've got aspiration, because we know that ultimately that's going to lead us somewhere to actually evoke a feeling in other people. And how much goes into production of a zine? How do you do this?
Oh my gosh. It's a lot because it starts with the call for submission. So we try to be very observant of like the environment that we're in, that goes from our city to social media or just the news and all that. And then there's a theme that will pop up. And then we talk about it as a team. We're now 10 at the core team of the Ottawa Design Club, which is crazy how much it's grown. And then we talk about our feelings again about it. And if we see that there's a lot of storylines that can come out from this. So after that, we have the call for submission where we invite people to submit their artwork. And we had to streamline this so we don't have a lot of admin work to do around that. Like, for instance, you want to make sure that the image that you submit is 300 dpi because we don't have time to check for everyone and that we have learned with our mistakes. And then we go through a whole curation meeting. And this is actually my favorite part of building the zine. It's because we get to, first of all, consume the content, but after to talk about it. And we always have guest curators from our community because we have the same conversations inside the club, but we want to make sure that we are not only looking in, that we are looking outwards and having different people with different mindset, different practices, different backgrounds really enlightens what we put in the zine. Because we want to make sure that we have a full 360 review with the theme that we are exploring. And then from that, there's the whole design phase. Just dropping the content takes a lot of time, like into our template. And I would say it's about the same as building a book, right? After that, you have to launch it, you have to market it, you have to go to print, you have to, hey, there's so much that goes into it. So, yeah, it takes a minimum of 6 months to a year to make our zines. Yeah. Because it's also volunteer, right?
Yeah, I can understand that. I kind of feel like this is considering that it didn't exist pre-pandemic. We're only in 2024. Sounds like a very mature operation because you said you've got 10 people on board now as part of the club, and then you have curation meetings and you've got guest curators. That is very grown up. That's very mature thinking because having been in bands, you're trying to compromise with 3 people or 2 people that's bad enough. And then you got 10 people on board. You're like, okay, how do we get everyone happy? Because some people sometimes have to be selfless. And you have to say, well, maybe this is not for me. And there's no better feeling than it sort of allowing yourself as a creative saying, I will be wrong on all of this. Like, if this is not for me, I want to see how it makes other people feel. I'm still like, what is the reaction? Because you know yourself, you know how you work, like how with the decisions you make because of X, Y, Z. Whereas we don't really work for ourselves, do we? We actually be creating things for other people. And I mean, I can give you a catalog of decisions I've made through my publishing journey, which was like, I would like it different, but there's part of me and there's something that I would need to see how other people would see it. So how do you get a guest curator? How do you select them and what do you look for in a guest curator?
That is such a good question. We are looking for someone who has been active in the community. so they understand our values and our mission. I think this is the most important. And we look at their practice as well, like what they do. For instance, so we are in the process of doing our 7th zine, which is insane thinking about it. And we had a photographer painter as guest curator. We had a event planner, music producer, video producer as well. Like she dabbles in a lot of different things. Very community focused, which is perfect fit with our mission at the club. And we also have a organic wood sculptor artist, and they all have different backgrounds. So that was very important for us. So we look for diversity, I'd say, after the fact that they understand the club, and they need to have conversations with us. They need to show that they're interested. And most of them have been featured in the zine before too. So this helps a lot. So they understand the process.
That sounds interesting in a way. What is the pool of creative you've got in Ottawa? Like, how big is the city and how many creatives roughly do you have there?
Oh my goodness, I should know this, but we're over 1 million here, which is not big, but not small either. And I would not know what's the percentage of creatives, because Ottawa is very vast if you want. It's a big city. Like you need to have a car to get around. And there's a lot of neighborhoods, and people will hang out in different neighborhoods. So this is one of our, again, biggest mission, or the hardest thing that we have to overcome when we have our events, is to bring people all in the same place and break down those cliques, which is very difficult. But once you can convince one person, then you'll see kind of the rest like coming in, which is great. So I don't know. I don't know what's the percentage of creatives, but there's enough.
Don't worry, like, you don't have to give me a a census answer, like 73.5% from one. No, and like, it's, of course, it's a speculative answer, but it sounds like there's a broad range of talent. That sounds like, it doesn't sound like you're going to run over your guest curators anytime soon. I think it's refreshing what you're doing, because to break down the barriers of the cliques and neighborhoods, you want to do it. It just doesn't happen because it's a good idea. Like, that takes time, passion, energy, devotion to actually do this for the community, because there's a lot of talk about build your community and do this and do that, but it's often only going to relate it to TikTok or Instagram, and he's thinking like, is that really a community, or is it just you're happy because you could follow it? And what you're describing is a totally different spectrum. Like, this is a proper boots on the ground, getting things done, and actually bringing physical people into physical spaces and actually getting them out of their comfort zones to come to you.
Correct. And it's very different than online. I mean, we do have like an online following and all this, and we have people following us from all over the world. They interact with us. But again, if you're truly in the community, you would attend an event. When everyone is in the room, we have, again, it's all about that feeling. This is what I will tell to my team. I'm like, people will not remember the speakers per se. They won't remember the food that we have offered them. They won't remember the environment, the branding of the event. They will remember how they felt when they left the room. They will remember if they made connection. They will remember like if they felt inspired at the end. So this is what we need to focus on. And this is how you foster a community. And we have specific roles the day of the event in order to even uplift that. So to me, this is the most important role. And we're actually training people to do this, which is insane when you think about it. But we call them social butterflies. So they are volunteers that have as a task to go seek people who are maybe a bit more on the side on their phone, and you can tell that they are at the event by themselves, that they want to engage, but they're like shy. And their task is to go talk to them and have a white little lie saying, hey, like, I'm also here myself. Do you want to come network with me? Or, oh, I actually see my friends here. Do you want to come meet them? So then they feel like they are part of the club as well. And we have noticed that by doing this after every event, that the cliques are starting to break, and you can see within like how people dress. The styles are very much like all over the place, and it's not like in a group, like within the room. And this is the best. And when we go to other events and people come to see us and they say, "Oh, I've met so and so and so because of your event. I am so happy. Thank you so much for doing this. We needed this." This is the best feeling, really. And this is how you know it's working. The energy that we're putting in and the strategies that we're putting in is working.
I love your expression of social butterfly, because I had Matthew Haynes from Design Conference from Australia on the show, and he was talking about that you can have like an extra lanyard at the event saying, "I'm here on my own," or "I'm here with a group. Come and talk to us. Come and talk to me," because that social anxiety at events is so real. And even it doesn't matter even if you're a speaker, because you might be at an event or you in the city, you've never met anyone. You're like, I've got no one to talk to. I'm here to speak to you from the stage, but I've got no one to talk to. Like, how do we break this down? And there's this almost like a natural shyness. And not many creatives have got confidence of a serial killer, like it's literally, it's just like, I really want to be in the room, but I want to sit here on my own, and I might leave. I'm not going to ask the speaker any questions. I'm not going to ask the organizers. So it's really nice that we have exercised that emotional intelligence that is the little thing, because what you described has almost nothing to do with creativity. People are there because of creativity, but you bring them together and making those connections where you never know where those people might meet or cross paths in their life. You're like, "Hey, I know you. You're my friend. I don't really care what you do right now. Like, this is all about something completely different. Maybe I'll need you for something completely different in my life. I can help you." Right? And I think it's amazing. And you said, like, it's a little white light. I'm here on my own. Whatever it takes is the right thing to do. And I salute you for it, because I think it's great. And I think what you're doing is, it goes beyond creativity. The things that you do, you put yourself in a driving seat, or not the leading seat, or you're waving the flag in the front of the procession in a way. I don't know how to explain it right now, but it's incredible. And I'm really happy for you that the energy spent is energy well received. And yeah, what you just described, I think, means a lot than someone's nice Behance portfolio, or some sort of community on Instagram. So that's amazing. So we've talked about what you do quite well. Now I want to talk about you in a way. How do you see yourself? How do you project yourself to the world through, we don't necessarily need to talk about work, but how do you project yourself into the world, and how do you want to make people feel? Because through your Ottawa Design Club, we know that. And how do you do that for your clients, through your work and through your sort of expression of creativity? Where is the next iteration of Izzy?
So I guess this is where we can talk about personal branding, because I've noticed recently that there was a disconnect with what I did and how I presented and how even people saw me. They didn't see me as Isabel the freelancer. It was Isabel the founder of Ottawa Design Club, which is great, but it's not something that pays the bills. And it was, like I said, it was also confusing because they see me promoting Adobe Live, which is also very community focused, which is great. And this is why I love doing it. And, but then it's like, oh yeah, she also does design. And I've noticed with opportunities that would come my way that as soon as I would start to talk to prospect, that they would be surprised of how I'm expressing myself or the ideas that I could bring to the table. And I was like, this is not right, because I'm working really hard. I know the level of quality that I can bring. If they hadn't picked up a zine or hadn't come to an event, what social proof do they have? Or if they don't know Adobe Live, and most people don't in Ottawa, unfortunately. So, how do I present? Well, I'm just a creative doing a lot of free work, which is a massive problem. So, I had to go through a massive brand strategy process in order to also put my own self, because as you can imagine, being in my fourth year of freelancing and doing the club on the side, helping New York City to get the ground running as well, there's no free time. So I actually put myself through my own brand strategy process, which was hardcore because you can't see your own gaps. And I forced myself to see my own gaps. And this was hard. And I had to find the common denominator in everything that I did and that I loved doing. And this was community. Everything that I have done, even back at the government, where it was about building this community, bringing people together. And there is definitely a need for that in the market, like in the design market. So right now I'm going through this massive rebranding process in order to brand myself as Isabel, the community builder, or brand, or can you say, I guess, community designer if you want. And now I feel confident enough, which I was not before, but I feel confident enough to have the experience in order to lead with that, as confident as I was when I started the Ottawa Design Club, which feels really good, but also scary AF. Because what if it works really, really well? What if I don't think I have touched that level of success yet?
I want to go back a few steps because you said I've done my own strategy and I couldn't see my own gaps. We talk about personal branding, which in your case sounds very conscious. Sometimes we become what we become, and sometimes we need to fix it. Sometimes we can hide behind a moniker, or sometimes, we used to have something called IP designs. And I, for example, personally, like I had to use something called brand new because my name in the English speaking world was quite complicated. So brand new was just something that actually I grew into. But as you say, it's this sort of dissonance or this mixed messaging, because what you talked about is, to me, didn't necessarily feel like a problem of branding. It's more like a messaging. Because let's take LinkedIn as an example. LinkedIn wants you to be one thing. Like if you're more than one thing, you're like, so are you a founder at your coffee company? Or are you a creative director at your studio? Or actually, are you author at a book publishing company? All three things. But LinkedIn is like, well, choose one. It can be different things. And I think we still live in a world that's been built on a linear path. You walk, basically, you climbing up the ladder, leaning against something, and that what you choose that something to be. But you put your ladder and you climb the same straight way. Doesn't work anymore, right? We've got this most amazing time to live in where we can do whatever flip we like. We can have a zine, you can be a community builder, you can be a designer, you can that. But there is a reason why the ladder was existing, because it's easier for people to understand. And sometimes, even as humans, I don't think we can be everything 100%. 100% can only be split into different percentages. And sometimes you're like, what do I want to be the most? Because if you sort of dilute your messaging, and people say, do you still do this or do you still do that? Because they come from that linear mindset. Like if I say, I want to start my sixth business because there's a great opportunity, which makes me really excited, make me feel something. People be like, what don't you do? I'm like, well, it's there. I don't want to leave a stone unturned or leave money on the table or opportunity on the table. This is the thing that is maybe a question of messaging, and how do we get the world to understand that if someone is a successful entrepreneur with 7 different companies, they are just entrepreneur because they just got companies. Whereas if you do 6 different things as a creative, like, so did you stop doing that thing? Are you still doing that? And where do we even take it apart? So is it messaging or is it branding? Because conscious branding is fantastic. Like you can actually give yourself a head start. So I'm going to rewind it back and say, how did you start with your own strategy? Because that fascinates me.
So I don't talk about that often, but I am a certified brand architect. So that's strategy. And I have learned a lot through the level C programs and refined a few things that made sense for like how I see the world. And again, it's like the process that I would use for clients, like I put myself in the client's shoes, which was interesting. But how I started was essentially at the core. I asked myself, what is my core purpose? And again, just I had this big web of things that I had already done that I love doing and where I see that I can bring value. And at the core, it was building community. And community can mean so many things. And I want to help the entrepreneurs or the businesses that does not necessarily want to like only have sales, right? And see everything in numbers. I want to help entrepreneurs and businesses that wants to have a thriving community, that want to bring people together that truly live their mission. And right now I would say that I'll definitely aim for the cultural sector because this is where I feel like I can bring the most value with my BFA and what I have done with the club as well, and even past experience. We have not talked about this, but before going to the government, I was the interim director in an art gallery for a year. So this has brought a lot of experience there too. But then community means nonprofit, means events, means could also mean yoga, vegan, gluten free. Like it can mean so many things. So I feel that there's so many layers to that word that I really want to explore. And this is very exciting for me. So this is, I guess, where I started.
I think the true purpose and the true north of what you describe it for your community building only naturally leads into what you're going to do next. Because when you started saying like, I'm a community builder, it's like, well, I know, but then you explained it some more. It's like, actually, I want to build brands with people or things with people that bring people together. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. This is good. It's verbal. As I said earlier, like we can project all of the work we ever produced into the world and it can be seen in one piece at a time. Whereas you can explain yourself, like how you want to make people feel, what you can do for them, what the solutions you can solve. Because when you think about it, most of deals are done because someone can speak about their purpose, someone can speak about their solutions, like how you make people feel something, you make them feel safe, they can trust you, and this is how you can seal the deal. So we can be the most amazing creative or average, but is the person who can actually talk about their work and talk about the projection of how they can apply it in the real world. That's what wins projects, and rather than look, the Pantone color on this one is amazing. So I think this is fantastic news. I think where you go in makes perfect sense because on my previous episode, I had someone who helps digital agencies stand out and have their own patch. And he literally said, build your niche around what you care about. Then we sometimes don't even have time to think about what we care about. Like, what do you want me to do? I'll do that. Okay, you're going to pay me? I'll do that because I've got bills to pay. And I've got bill to pay. I've got this to pay. This is to do. Okay, of course I'll do this. What do you mean to do? I've never done this, but I'm going to do it for you. Like, we get ourselves into this muddle and that taking time out can feel really frightening. And we're like, of course I need a steady cash flow. I need a steady income. But then you realize that maybe 5 years of work were like just survival. And it just takes that little bit of courage to say, you know what? I'm going to build my own reality here by doing what really I care to know, what I care about, what makes me happy, and validate it even because you can find yourself going towards a goal for years and years and years, only to find out that the goal was right, but you were not aligned. Like you necessarily, like we don't always come in a ready state, ready here. And I think to have that sort of foresight to actually say, I'm gonna work on my strategy. This is what I'm going to do. Normally, people in this situation, especially when you say you can't see your own gaps, they would ask for feedback from clients or others like, did you do that? Because I believe we are always too scared to hear the truth.
I did. That was interesting. an interesting process. I've talked to a few people, and I basically approached the problem by saying, hey, this is what I want to do. And they all had kind of the same reaction as you did, but like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, why have you not seen this earlier type thing? But then I wanted to make sure that I had mastered my client persona properly, because I wanted to make sure that all of the communication that I'm currently working on and putting money on, because I hired people to help me on this, which is also very scary, was good. And I know you always have to beta test and all that, but sometimes you don't have that bandwidth to test that much, right? So I want to make sure that a few things hits properly. So I go on a call, and I don't know if I can mention this, to actually test out my client profile. And the person on the other end chewed my head up and spit it right back out and bruised my ego like no tomorrow. And he even started by saying, I don't know your niche, so I can't help you, but still proceed to bashing my decisions. And granted, it's not like when you ask that type of question, there's so much work that goes behind building a client persona. And I try to go really in depth in my client persona. I think this is also a strength of mine and how you can really build community. Because the more detail you have for your client persona, the more you get to know who you're trying to attract, to a point where I know what my clients are watching on Netflix type thing, the better it is. So essentially, the question that was asked was, do you know someone who is in the same niche as you? Completely dismissed the work that I had done with my client persona. And I'm like, yes, I do. He's like, okay, do you know how much they're making a year? And I'm like, no, I don't. And proceed to say, well, do you really want this if you don't know and you haven't asked? And you seem like someone who doesn't put themselves in an uncomfortable situation if you're afraid to ask. That was harsh to hear, because it's like, oh my goodness, I understand the whole aspect of business here, but it's not a question that you can just bluntly ask like when you meet someone at a conference. So we talked about this, and I felt that this lesson that I was being taught in the moment was extremely harsh. And I was going through a lot of emotions, because it has been a vulnerable process to begin with in rebranding and looking within and, parting with IP design and all this, because I've been doing it for a long time under IP design. And I was very fragile. So after that call, I did shed into tears. And it took me a few days, I would even say few weeks, before truly understanding what that meant. Because after that, I did have conversations with people in this industry, and I did dare to ask the questions, and it did enlighten me a lot on what I was about to, like the train that I was about to get on. And I'm like, oh, that was the lesson.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was Naval who said, hard choices, easier life, because you might not ask that question, how much do people earn, or what it entails, because sometimes we really want to be naive. We don't want to know all the hard truths. But then you've got hard life of trying to actually make it work. So you know what? Sometimes being, I'm going to say kicked in the teeth or punched in the tummy, doesn't feel nice at all, but it's necessary, because easy stuff doesn't pay back. It's just all way too easy. And I think sometimes we need hard truths. Sometimes we need them. And when it comes to all sorts of creative pursuits and endeavors, someone gives us, when it comes to creative pursuits, we ask people for feedback, hoping they will celebrate it. Like, yes, this is great. And then, oh, maybe you want to change this. And like, oh, fuck off. I wasn't asking for feedback like that. Just say it's great because I just done it, But then you look back years later or days later, let's start. Okay. When you look back days later, week later, you're like, oh, they were right. And it can be really it could be full of revelations when you actually look back at your portfolio. But like, there were actually some really good moments. Actually, I've got time to look back and actually audit the good stuff, because when you're in the middle of it, you don't know your name, who you are, what your persona is. So having done that work on where you want to go next is going to pay off, because you are more bulletproof. Because especially if you changing lanes or like rebuilding a different identity for yourself, kind of, or dialing up the strengths and experiences that make almost one of a kind in that respect, I think it's liberating, because you either get there by 20 years of experience, or you get there by uncomfortable conversations about the things that you haven't had chance to experience in 20 years. So yeah, whoever that person was, they don't not really want to make people cry, but yeah, hard choices, easier life. And I think it's something that almost doesn't make sense at first, but when you realize, you know what, you've saved yourself an embarrassment in a meeting with someone who's a prospect, and asking people about money, you need to do it your way. You need to find your way how to do it. And sometimes it's a question of trust. It's like when you've got your authority, it's easy to get those answers out of people. So it's an interesting junction of your life, creative life, personal life. I think just it's sort of blossoming. Obviously, you planted your seeds and it's beginning to sprout and blossom. So you only need some time to see where it goes. With where you are heading, and I'm intrigued by it, like knowing what people watch on Netflix. Where do you want to get with the new work? Like, is there a particular organization? And let's do sort of projection and vision. Like, what would you like to achieve? Because it seems to me that you've done that work and you know exactly who you want to work with and how.
So this may not be the most lucrative project, but definitely a dream project that I would like to be invited on would be to help on the design of an exhibit for a big museum. Art would be really cool. And then obviously help with the whole visual aspect of that, the branding of the exhibit, and obviously the book. There's always an exhibition book that explains the whole exhibit. And if it was something like the Biennale or like a very contemporary show that's like showcasing a lot of artists, I would love to do this. We're technically already doing it with the zines, and this is again part of the strategy why I'm doing all this, and now even building art shows around our zine launch for people to experiment with the artwork in a different way and buy the zines. But I would really like to do that on a way bigger scale, and hopefully in another city. Like I'm thinking Montreal, Toronto, and then if I allow myself to dream, I'd love to be even like New York City or London, or a big metropolitan like this would be amazing. I think I could die after.
No, don't do that. There's more dreams to chase afterwards, but you never know where things will take you. And I'm happy for you that you're at this junction where it takes you to a new chapter that you potentially didn't even know existed. And sometimes when you started this interview, well, you started this conversation saying, I'm doing things in parallel, but they are pretty much the one thing. Like now you're on a single track with multiple output rather than on two different tracks. And it's remarkable to get there this quickly, because some people might be running on 5 different tracks and not really necessarily know how they overlap, because eventually all of the experiences and knowledge and skill set do amalgamate into one thing that we get known for. Because even though I've given LinkedIn a hard time about you have to choose the one thing on LinkedIn, you don't have to choose it for yourself. And I think this is the beautiful part. Like, you might have a slightly longer story at a networking meeting saying, what do you do? Well, I do a lot of things. I'm a designer and author, for example, but I do like zillion different things. I know where my North Star is. And in your case, you're a community builder. And I think if our world wasn't intricate and elaborate and full of curiosity, then we'd be in the wrong job. So I think it's just that thing, like, how do we celebrate our creativity for what it is? Because maybe we'll be on the cusp of something really exciting that having our sort of little breadcrumbs that we can put together and that makes us who we are, it's going to be easy to explain and easy to be understood, especially in the future.
No, you're absolutely right.
I'm excited for what's coming next. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
thank you for having the time to explain to me what your branding vision is for yourself, because what I try to do with the show is to go behind the scenes and actually share with people of how does it go behind the scenes, because someone who may have never seen you, like never heard of you, like, oh, how did you get to be a community builder? But the way you described it, like it goes to your BFA, obviously it goes to your painting projects, and that's where art now is part of your dream project. And I think it's remarkable. It's remarkable because you never know where your curiosity takes you and how it's going to influence your life in the future. So thank you for your time. And I hope, we can speak in a few years' time or whenever we speak next on this podcast with saying, hey, guess what? I've just done it. I've done the project.
I'd love that. And I have to say thank you so much for having me today. It's been wonderful to share this. It's the first time that I share all this, so it's quite special.
Well, thank you for giving me the space and an opportunity to hear that. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Creativity for Sale podcast. The show was produced and presented by me, Radim Malinic. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil Mackay from 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. Theme music was written and produced by Robert Summerfield. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating or review. To get your own action plan on how to start and grow a life-changing creative business, you can get a copy of Creativity for Sale book via the links in show notes. As always, keep those creators' fires burning, and until next time, I'm Radim Malinic, your guide through this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all. Hey, just a quick note to say thank you for joining me on this episode. If this is your first time or you're a regular listener, please take a minute and rate the show on your chosen platform. A short review helps every show to be more visible to new listeners and provide them with value. So thank you for helping out. Thank you.